How's it going, everyone? Grim here, and today we're going to be doing a special multi-part video on building tips and tricks for the Forge World Fire Raptor Gunship. Now, if you've seen my previous video, you saw the unboxing of the Fire Raptor, and you know that it is a resin and plastic kit. So when you're assembling this, you're going to have to be working with both resin and plastic and joining the two together. However, before we even get to the joining phase, we have to do the preparation phase. And that's what this video today is going to be about. Part 1 is about the actual preparation of the pieces before we go into part 2, which will be the assembly. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the tip for removing the pieces from the sprues and the excess fill gates. So if it's plastic, it's going to be on sprues, obviously. And if it's resin, there's probably going to be these fill gates that are attached to the resin pieces. As an example, right? You're going to have this attached to this resin piece, which is the bottom of the fuselage of the vehicle. And you're going to have to remove this. Now, here's the tip for removing all of this excess resin pieces. There are two types of ways of doing it. You're either going to cut, which is going to be with a knife or razor blade, or snips. So you're going to use razor blade or some kind of snips. And that's cutting, so you can cut the piece off of the excess resin, or you're going to saw it off. And there are all kinds of these little hand saws for this hobby, right? This one has a nice rubberized grip. It's really simple. It's just, metal that holds a modified hacksaw, but it does the job really well. If you have excess resin that's this size or smaller, using a razor blade to cut the piece off, doable, no problem, real easy. However, if you got these bigger ones, and they get even bigger than this, I mean, there are fill gates where this fill pull is the diameter of my finger, the diameter of my thumb, even bigger sometimes. Depending on the size of the resin model, they can get very big. This one is big in comparison to this one. And anything big like this or bigger, you cannot cut with a razor blade. Or at least you can try, and you're going to damage your razor blade, and you're probably going to tire yourself out trying to cut through that. And you're definitely going to damage your snips if you try and snip through that. Okay, that's crazy. So situations like that, that's where the saw comes in. You're gonna have to saw. All right. So depending on the size, it determines what instrument you're using: razor blade, snips, or even a saw. All right. So keep that in mind. That's a good tip. Now here's a trick. When you are removing these pieces, these model pieces from the excess resin, you're going to want to make the cut or the saw 2 to 3 millimeters away from the actual piece. So what am I saying? I'm saying if you had this, I think it was like that. But if you have this, right, and it's connected like that, you don't want to cut with the razor blade right at the very edge of the piece, where you're like, oh, let me cut it just like that kind of thing. You don't want to do that. You're going to want to do it where it's at least a couple of millimeters away. Right? You can see that? Okay? It's not up against the piece like that, but it's a couple millimeters away. And you're going to cut at that point, so that when you actually separate this excess resin, there's going to be a little bit still stuck on there. And then once you get to that phase, you're going to be able to use your razor blade and kind of gently cut it off because it's a real small piece of resin, or you're going to use a hand file like this, and you can file it off. But the reason why you want to keep it away from the actual piece is you don't want to, one, accidentally damage the piece. With whatever cutting or sawing implement you use, you don't want to accidentally damage the resin piece itself. And then number two, as you're cutting through something with either snips or a knife or a razor blade, really what you're doing is you're splitting it, right? By cutting down here and cutting, you're splitting the material in half. And that splitting process causes the material overall to bow. And as it bows, if it's right next to the piece of the model you're trying to, you want to keep intact, that bowing process may accidentally damage the piece. So that's why you want to do it 2 to 3 millimeters away, so that if it damages anything, it damages that 2 to 3 millimeters of resin that you're not going to need anyway, and you're going to gently kind of like cut off like that, or file off with the file. Here's a trick. Well, it's not a trick. It's actually a really important safety issue. So, safety. When you're using a saw, when you're using a file, okay, you're basically causing dust, resin dust, to come up into the air. And it's important that you use a respirator when you're sawing or filing, because resin dust in your lungs is no bueno. It is very, very bad. Okay, so don't settle for just a simple little mask that you think that, like even an N95 mask that you can buy in the store nowadays. They don't have a good seal around your face, right? The masks that they use, maybe at the hospital sometimes, and then the masks that they use for construction, those tend to have a good seal. But really, the smart people use respirators. And that has a nice solid rubber seal around your face to make sure no dust accidentally goes into your lungs, because then it's really bad if you breathe that stuff in. So, sawing and filing, use a respirator. If you're just cutting, right, with the razor blade, there's no dust, so there's no chance of you breathing that in. This, however, is a good tip when it comes to, or a good trick when it comes to sawing, okay? Now, remember how I said with the knife or the snips or razor blade, you're splitting the plastic or you're splitting the resin by cutting into it. Well, when you're sawing, right, as you saw, and I know I'm breaking my own rule by saying wear a respirator when you saw, and I'm not wearing a respirator right now, but it's really minor. I'm not really sawing. I'm just doing a little bit as an example. When you saw, right, you're not splitting the material. Instead, you're removing the material entirely and turning the material into dust. And so that it's not a split, but it's an actual gap, right? So using a saw doesn't cause that warping or bowing effect that splitting with a knife does. So don't worry about that bowing thing when you're actually sawing. However, I still recommend you don't saw right next to the piece. Like, let's say this was the piece of the model you wanted to keep intact. Don't saw right up next to it, kind of thing like that. I still wouldn't recommend that, because there's still the possibility you may accidentally saw into the piece, and that's bad. Okay, so don't do that. But that's how you remove the excess resin gates when you're using plastic, or when you're going off the plastic, right? A lot of people like to use these snips. Same thing, a couple millimeters away. Snip a couple millimeters away, so that when you remove this from the sprue, there's just a little bit there that you can then go with the razor blade and gently scrape off, okay? And this plastic is so soft that as you're gently scraping off, you won't have that problem of the warping or the bowing effect on both sides. Instead, the bowing will be all on the one side with the excess plastic, and you'll see that plastic bow as you scrape it off with the razor blade, leaving this side completely intact. So that's what you're going to want to do with the plastic pieces, okay? Very important when cutting. You're also going to want to remove flash, and there's going to be a lot of flash everywhere. What is flash? Flash is that really thin part of resin, paper thin pieces of resin that show up every now and then on these models, because when they cast them with the mold, right, the mold comes together like that as two pieces, and it's possible that it's not a perfect seal in between the two mold pieces, and then some resin leaks through, and then when they remove it, there's that leaking through thin sheet of resin. And this landing gear was a great example of that. All in between this tube and this strut, there was flash that I had to then go in and it's real easy. You just gently cut it out with a razor blade, right? No problem. Of course, there is the potential that you accidentally damage the piece itself when you do that. So go very, very slow. Very, very slow. You're going to find with this model, the Fire Raptor, there's a lot of flash in between here as well. Okay, so same thing. You're going to have to go in there real slow. Make sure you don't cut into the strut itself. And let's be honest. I mean, depending on why you're making this model, if you're making it to play in a game, nobody's really going to inspect the strut and see, oh look, I can see a little gouge there where a razor blade accidentally damaged it or whatever like that, right? They are going to notice if you leave the flash on, but they're probably not going to notice if you accidentally cut a little bit into the piece itself. So not a big deal. However, if you're building this for, like, you know, a Golden Demon Award type thing, then I don't know, that's something that you might have to address with some sanding to fix it. Maybe during the priming process, the primer might take care of hiding that little gouge or cut that you accidentally did with the razor blade when you're removing the flash or whatever. But just keep in mind that that's a possibility. Okay? All right. The next tip you're going to want to do, once you get all the big pieces and the flash cut off, once you get all of these plastic pieces, and I'll show you the plastic pieces right now, right, removed from the sprue. And in this particular kit, it had the sprues, or most of the sprues, for the Storm Talon gunship. So you couldn't completely make the Storm Talon with all the plastic, but you only needed some of the plastic pieces from the Storm Talon that was in this Fire Raptor kit to combine with the resin pieces to make the Fire Raptor. And this is all you really needed. Now, once you get them all cut out, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to wash them. All right, that's the next tip. You have to wash the resin. You don't need to wash the plastic, but you have to wash the resin for two reasons. Reason number one, as you're sawing, you're creating a lot of dust. And with your respirator on, that's not a problem. And then you're going to vacuum up your area once you're done with all of the sawing, right? But there's still going to be a lot of dust on the pieces themselves. So washing them will help get rid of those dust particles. But the second and more important reason for why you wash resin pieces is that when they cast these, they use something called mold release agent in the mold. And it's basically like a non-stick spray that you would use when you're cooking on a frying pan. And they spray it on the insides of the two molds, and then they put the molds together, and then they fill the mold with liquid resin. So that when they're done, they separate it, the piece is able to release from the mold quite easily. Well, that agent is still kind of stuck on a lot of these resin pieces, and you'll be able to see it because it'll be shiny. You know, you see some places that are kind of shiny, and then you see the resin exposed like it's supposed to be, and then some other pieces where it's shiny. And that's the mold release agent, and you're going to want to get rid of that. You're going to have to get rid of that. So using soapy water, it doesn't need to be warm, although a lot of people say use warm soapy water. Whatever, if you want to, you can. I'm just saying it doesn't really need to be warm in my opinion, but use soapy water. Dish soap works well. And you're going to want to scrub it with a soft bristle toothbrush. One of your old toothbrushes is fine. Do not use a hard bristle, however, because anything hard may accidentally scratch the resin, because resin is very soft. It's soft and brittle. That's why it's both good and bad. You can have lots of detail, like on the landing pad, you can have this Aquila because it's so soft, but it's also soft and brittle, and you can accidentally damage it that way, or accidentally break a piece in half. So you're going to want to wash it, wash away all that mold release agent, use a toothbrush, just scrub that. You don't have to scrub too hard. It's real simple. Just, put the stuff in the soapy water, take a piece out, scrub, 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 run it a couple of times under clean water, and you're good to go. Do that with all the pieces. Then you're going to want to lay them out on a towel and let them dry overnight. Real simple. Obviously, I did that already with these pieces. That's why you see that, it's all cleaned and all prepped already, and I wanted to show you what the pieces are like once they've been removed, or the excess resin has been removed and they've been washed. Okay. Now, you'll notice that this piece right here, there's a magnet on it. Excuse me. Here's a good tip. If you're going to magnetize in any way, shape, or form, do it now. I plan on magnetizing these guns because they're the turret guns. And you can have either the heavy bolter option or you can have the las cannon option. I did not put magnets in these yet. I will before I get to the assembly process. But you're going to want to magnetize pieces now before you start to assemble these, because it's easier to work with the individual piece in drilling holes to put in the magnets than it is once you've partially assembled this model, and then, now I gotta drill and hold this big thing and trying to drill to make the hole and that type of stuff. So it's easier to just work with the individual pieces, but it's going to take a little bit of planning because you need to know where on the piece, how it lines up perfectly with the other magnet on the opposing side, that type of thing, right? So, for example, this is the top of the fuselage, or at least the front top of the fuselage. This resin piece will go like that. This is part of the wing, and it will go like that. And so I've magnetized it so you can do that. Now you don't need to magnetize it. This even doesn't need to be magnetized at all. Okay? The only reason I'm doing this is because, and the same reason why I've put magnets here on the side of the fuselage, is because I want to break this down so that it's more compact for transportability. All right. Now, this is the side of the aircraft. And if you want to do this, you can do this. That's fine. But I'm just, for my model, I'm doing it. Left side, right? I put magnets on the engine here. And the engine is supposed to go like that. And normally you're going to glue it like that. But I magnetize it. The wing comes down here. So you can kind of see. This wing will come down here like that. And I want to be able to separate it so that the fuselage just ends up being this nice long thin thing that is more compact for storage and transportability. And then when I'm ready to play the game, I just got to magnetize, put the wings on, and they magnetize on. And then this thing kind of comes in on top like that. All right. So that's why I magnetized these particular things here. But normally you're not going to need to magnetize this kit except for the weapon options if you want to. Now, here's a good trick that I want to introduce you to if you didn't already know this. You will see that for some reason this looks really ugly, right? I mean, yeah, okay, I can see he drilled holes. And then what the heck is this ugly stuff here? It looks like super glue got like excess runoff or whatever. Well, what had happened was, these are 10 millimeter magnets, and then this part of the resin is like 11 millimeters wide. So it was really close, and I had to be really careful in measuring, and then it still got messed up because it's such a large diameter drill I had to use, that it ended up exposing the top part here, so that once I put in the magnets, you're able to see the magnets right there, the top of the magnet, or from the top looking down, you could see the magnets there. And I didn't like that. So what I did was I used super glue and baking soda, And when those two things are combined, they react to form this nice, hard, solid, crystalline structure. So all I did was, I put some tape right here to form like a little shim, and then I covered the magnets, drop, 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 drop of super glue till it was all nice and covered. And then I was able to sprinkle on baking soda. And you let that dry, and it turns into this nice hard structure here that I can now sand, clean up a little bit, smooth it out. And once I prime it and paint it, you won't even be able to see the difference between, this super glue material and the actual resin itself. So that's why that's there. And it's a great trick to tell you guys about how super glue and baking soda makes the best filler material for resin. For plastic, if you need filler material for plastic, sprue glue, right? Sprue glue is basically just liquid plastic. You put that on, and that, in my opinion, is the best filler material for plastic. Resin, however, I use this. A lot of people like to use green stuff, and yeah, okay, I get it. Green stuff is kind of like a two-part epoxy, which is kind of like what this super glue baking soda compound is. It's two parts being put together, and they form a chemical reaction that eventually hardens. Same concept, right, as green stuff. But anyway, if you want to use green stuff, go ahead and use green stuff. That's up to you. So that's the reason for that. All right, now when it comes to actually drilling the holes for a magnet, all right, here's a tip. If you got a magnet, and this magnet, for example, is 10 millimeters wide, you're going to want to be, hey, I got to make it exactly here so that it matches up exactly here. So that when I put this on, right, they match up exactly. So the best way is to center this. And you're going to want to drill a pilot hole first using a small diameter drill to drill that center pilot hole. Then you're going to work your way up drill bit by drill bit until you get to the 10 millimeter drill bit in order to make that hole for the magnet. This is a 2 millimeter thick magnet, and as you can see, this itself is actually only about 4 millimeters. So I had to be really careful. I didn't actually puncture all the way through. You got to go slow with the drill. Go very slow with the drill. All right. But I had to make that 10 millimeter hole, even though it was a very shallow hole, so that I can fit that magnet in there, because I can't just glue the magnet directly onto the resin piece, because then it wouldn't sit nicely here. Right. It would be like sitting up like that. And that's not good. So when you're doing that, making holes for magnets, right, make sure you use a pilot small diameter drill first. Make a pilot hole first, and then work your way up to whatever size drill bit you need for whatever size magnet you're using. This is a 10 millimeter one, right? If I was using these small 3 millimeter ones, obviously it wouldn't take as much. Another tip is to go very slow with the drill, your cordless drill. Okay, go very slow, because you don't want to accidentally gouge out too much material too fast, or else you're going to end up puncturing through. Slower the better, okay? Your drill is so much stronger than this resin, okay? So even if you go slow, it is going to cut through the resin very easily. Don't worry about it. Okay, don't worry, if I go too slow, I'm not going to get any progress. Trust me, you are. Just go slow. That is a very important tip. All right. Another tip, as you're figuring out where to put that pilot hole, you always measure twice and cut once. All right. So measure the center here twice so you know exactly where it is. Use a fine point Sharpie to put a little dot there to exactly where it needs to go. All right. So for example, let's pretend this magnet isn't here, but I want to put a hole there so I can put a magnet, and I measure it, okay? And let's say I measure it, and that is exactly where I want it to be. Can you see that? All right, good, you can, right? That's what I'm talking about, something as simple and small as that. Now, there is a problem with drilling. Whenever you drill, or when you start the drilling process, there's the possibility of skippage. And what is that? Well, let me use this as an example here. So you can see the drill holes came out really nice here, and the magnets slot in very nice, and of course I used super glue to glue them in. But let's say I wanted to put another magnet right there. I wanted to stick a 3mm magnet right in the center because I'm sadistic. And I measure it, and let's pretend I did measure it, okay? And that this is exactly what I want. That is perfectly centered. Let's pretend I measured it, and that's it. That's perfectly centered. And I go in to drill, okay? If I start to drill, I go push this down there. I go, yeah, that's right on the dot. And as I start to turn this to drill, you see how it walks? There's that possibility that the turning motion will have your drill bit skip off the dot. And then you start actually drilling off center. Okay, be careful of that. So here's a trick. When you have your measured twice dot, use a punch. And what you're going to do is, oh, that's a strong magnet. You're going to use this punch, and you're going to go right on the dot, and then you're going to press. All you're going to do is press. This resin is so soft and brittle. It's good and a bad thing, but it's so soft that the punch, just by pressing into it very, not even hard, just kind of gently, causes an indentation. Okay, it actually gouges into the resin. Now, when you go with your pilot drill bit, you have a little hole that it kind of rests in now, okay? And because it rests in that hole, the chances of you now skipping with the turning motion of your drill is almost gone, and you're able to drill right into exactly where you need it to drill. So that's a very good trick. Use a punch first for that very center, and then use the pilot drill. And then of course, I'm gonna go in with a 3mm drill bit later on afterwards to make it even wider so that I could fit that 3mm magnet in there. And like I said, you work your way up, right? Okay, so that's a good trick for drilling the holes for the magnets. Once for resin and for plastic, this plastic here, I use super glue to put it together, okay? And in the next video, we'll go over super glue and other types of adhesives that we're going to use for assembling this model which is both resin and plastic, all right? But that's in the next video. For now, I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up, like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any comments about anything I said, maybe you have a better way of washing resin pieces, or you have a better way of drilling holes for magnets, or whatever the case may be, please leave a comment, all right? I want to learn too. If there's a better way of doing it, I want to know too, and so does everybody else. Otherwise, thank you all very much for watching this video. Keep an eye out for part 2, and Grim out.